Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to plunge into something that's, well, it's running your life pretty much every single day, often without you even noticing.
That's right. We're talking about habits.
Exactly. These seemingly small automatic choices, but they add up, don't they? They become these incredibly powerful forces shaping our lives, the places we work, even society itself.
They really are the invisible architecture of our daily lives,
Yeah.
just running so much of what we do on autopilot.
And you, our listener, you've given us this fantastic pile of source material. It's a real mix. Insights, research findings, some really compelling stories, practical stuff too. It all drills down into how habits actually work, how they form, how we might change them, and just how far their influence goes.
Yeah, it's a fascinating collection. It's like a detailed map, really, to understanding these fundamental patterns that drive both what we do as individuals and how groups behave.
So our mission today, it's pretty straightforward. We're going to unpack all this material you sent over, pull out the key insights, the really important knowledge, try and figure out what makes habits tick, how much control do we really have, and what do they tell us about, well, us, human nature, the way our world is structured.
Think of it as a journey through some pretty surprising science and real-world examples, all coming straight from the sources you provided.
Okay, where do we start? The foundation, right? The basic science.
Let's do it, the core mechanism.
Okay, so the source material kicks off with this fundamental idea. It underpins basically everything else we'll talk about. The habit loop. And this isn't, just some fancy academic term. It's like the brain's actual operating system for turning actions into automatic routines.
That's a good way to put it. It's this really efficient three-step process. Always starts with a cue. Exactly, the trigger. Could be anything, a place, time of day, an emotion you feel, seeing certain people, or even just finishing another action. It's the signal that basically tells your brain, okay, switch to autopilot, run this program.
Right, the go button. And after the cue.
Comes the routine. That's the habit itself, the actual behavior you perform. Could be physical, like, automatically reaching for your keys when you walk out the door. Or mental, maybe checking your phone the second you feel bored.
Okay, cue, then routine. What's the third piece?
The reward. This is crucial. It's whatever your brain logs as, like positive or beneficial. It's the payoff that tells the brain, hey, this loop, this cue leading to this routine, it worked out. Remember this for next time.
And over time, that loop just gets stronger.
Precisely. It repeats. The neural pathway gets, paved, more established, and the whole thing takes less and less conscious thought. It becomes automatic.
It sounds almost mechanical. Where did scientists first really nail this down? The sources point to MIT back in the 90s.
Yeah, that's where the neurobiology really started coming together. These MIT researchers, they were zeroing in on a specific part of the brain, the basal ganglia.
Okay.
It's this lump of neural tissue kind of deep inside near the center. For ages, its exact job was a bit murky, but the MIT work showed it was absolutely critical for processing routines, for automating behavior.
And they figured this out with rats in mazes, right? The classic setup.
The classic setup. So picture this. They put rats in a simple T-shaped maze. At one end of the T, chocolate. The reward.
Always chocolate.
Always chocolate. And they had these tiny probes implanted in the rats' brains, including the basal ganglia, measuring neural activity while the rats searched for the treat.
And the source describes those first few attempts. The rats are hesitant, right? Sniffing around, going the wrong way.
Totally. Lots of exploration, lots of errors, active problem solving. And during that initial phase, the brain scans showed high activity all over the place. The brain was working hard, taking in info, weighing options.
But then after they'd done it a few times,
something really cool happened. As they learned the maze running it, day after day they got faster, made fewer mistakes, went straight for the chocolate. They figured out the route.
And their brain activity?
It decreased significantly. During the actual running of the maze, large parts of the brain, including the basal ganglia, quieted right down. You'd see a spike of activity right at the start when they heard the click or were placed in the maze. That's the cue. And then another spike when they got the reward. But the routine itself, the running, much less brain power needed.
Wow. So the brain's basically saying, got it, cue received, running the program now, wake me when the chocolate arrives.
Pretty much. This is what the researchers called chunking. The brain takes this sequence of actions, turn left, run straight, sniff, turn right, and bundles it all together into one automatic unit, one chunk.
Like tying your shoes. You don't think about every loop and not...
Exactly. Or driving home on a route you know perfectly. You just do it. You're not actively deciding each turn. Your brain has chunked that routine. You might even arrive and think, I don't really remember the drive.
Definitely done that.
And the reason the brain does this, the real significance here, is efficiency. Habits let the brain conserve energy. By automating common tasks, the basal ganglia frees up the more energy-intensive parts of the brain, like the prefrontal cortex, which handles complex thought, planning, decision-making, to deal with new stuff, unexpected problems.
So it's like the brain outsourcing routine tasks to save bandwidth.
That's a great way to think about it.
Okay, that's fascinating. Habits start conscious, then sink into this automatic, efficient mode. But the source material brings, in this case, Eugene Pauly, and that seems to have really changed the game.
Eugene's story is, well, it's both tragic and scientifically profound. He had this severe memory loss from viral encephalitis. Couldn't form new long-term memories at all. He basically lived in a constant present moment. Couldn't recall breakfast or who'd visited him 5 minutes ago.
That's hard to even imagine.
Truly devastating. Severe amnesia. But Larry Squire, a researcher working with him, found something incredible. Even though Eugene couldn't consciously remember anything new, he could still learn new tasks. He could form new habits.
Without remembering learning them.
Without any conscious memory of it. The source gives this amazing example. Eugene couldn't draw you a map of his own house. If you asked him, how do I get to the kitchen? He wouldn't know.
Right.
But if he felt hungry, he could get up from his chair, walk down the hall, turn into the kitchen, a kitchen he couldn't describe, open the right cupboard, and get himself some almonds.
Wow. He could do it, but couldn't explain it or remember having done it before.
Exactly. His conscious memory for the layout for the learning process was gone. But the habit, the sequence of movements linked to the cue, I feel hungry, in the location living room that was intact. His body knew the way, even if his conscious mind didn't.
And there were lab tests too, right? With objects.
Yeah. Squire would show him pairs of objects, maybe on cards. Under one specific object in each pair, there'd be a hidden piece of paper. Which object had the paper depended on the specific pair shown.
So he had to learn the association.
Right. At first, Eugene just guessed. But over many trials, he started consistently picking the correct object to find the paper. Every single time. He got the reward. But if Squire asked him why he chose that object, or even if he remembered seeing the objects before,
He had no idea.
no clue. He'd say things like, it just feels right, or gesture to his head like, it's just in here somewhere. The source includes that image. Vengloop Thoy Ken Eugene, Eugene's habit loop. It shows the cue, the objects presented, the routine, choosing the correct object, checking underneath, the reward, finding the paper. His basal ganglia, the habit center, was working perfectly fine, laying down these routines completely outside his conscious awareness.
That is profound. And a bit unsettling, honestly. It proved habits are separate from conscious memory and reason, different brain systems entirely.
Absolutely revolutionary. And the implication is huge. It means a lot of what we do every day might be driven by these deeply embedded automatic scripts that we maybe don't even remember learning, let alone consciously choose in the moment.
The source uses that phrase, manung mung man, strong but fragile.
Right. Habits are incredibly powerful drivers, formed often without us noticing. But the flip side, the hope from Eugene's case and later work, is that because they have this structure, cue, routine, reward, they aren't necessarily unbreakable. If you can understand and tweak the components, you can potentially change them, even if you don't remember how they got there.
Okay, so we have the basic loop, cue, routine, reward, but what makes it so sticky? What gives it that real power over us?
This is where craving comes in. It's the secret sauce, really. And a lot of this insight comes from Wolfram Schultz's work with monkeys. Similar brain probe techniques as the MIT rat studies.
Right, like with Julia the monkey. Trained to expect juice, the reward, after seeing a specific image on a screen, the cue.
Exactly. Now, initially, Schultz saw what you'd expect. A burst of activity in Julia's brain's reward system, dopamine neurons firing, when she got the juice. The reward itself caused the spike.
Okay, makes sense.
But as Julia learned the pattern, learned that the image predicted the juice, something fascinating happened to the timing of that dopamine spike. It started firing not when the juice arrived, but when the cue appeared.
Whoa, so the brain got excited before the reward, just seeing the trigger.
Precisely. The brain started anticipating the reward. That neural surge shifted to the moment of expectation. It demonstrated that the brain learns to crave the reward as soon as the cue is detected.
So it's not just cue, routine, reward, it's cue, craving, routine, reward.
That's the deeper understanding. The habit loop isn't just mechanical. It's fueled by this powerful neurological anticipation, this craving for the reward that the cue ignites. The brain starts expecting that payoff, And that expectation, that desire, is what really drives you to perform the routine. The source uses that great analogy. It's like adding fuel to the fire. The cue lights the match, but the craving is the fuel that makes the habit burn strong.
Okay, that explains so much, like
Yeah.
why it's so hard to break a bad habit just by knowing it's bad. You're not just fighting the action, you're fighting this intense brain-level craving that gets switched on by the cue.
Absolutely. And willpower alone often feels powerless against that surge. The source mentions that example of eating your kid's leftover cookies even when you're stuffed.
Guilty.
Right. The cue cookie sitting there triggers the learned expectation of that sugary, satisfying taste, the reward that sparks a craving. Your brain screams, cookie time, even if your stomach is saying no more. The habit loop, fueled by craving, overrides the logical or physiological signal.
Okay, so understanding the loop and the power of craving is step one. Now, how have people or companies actually used this knowledge? The source gives some great examples of creating or changing habits by manipulating cues and rewards.
Yeah, the classic case study has to be Claude Hopkins and Pepsodent toothpaste, early 20th century.
Right, toothpaste wasn't a big thing back then. Most people didn't brush daily. Hopkins had to basically create that habit for millions.
He was this legendary ad man, and he had these rules for scientific advertising. One key rule: find a simple, obvious cue and link it clearly to a desirable reward.
So for Pepsodent, what was his breakthrough?
He focused on Mangbam, dental plaque.
Yeah.
He advertised this film on teeth that made them look dull and feel unclean.
Which is clever because plaque is, well, it's always kind of there, isn't it? He didn't invent the problem, just made people aware of it as a cue.
Exactly. He made the invisible visible and framed it as something you'd want to get rid of. The promised reward was straightforward: hammered up, beautiful teeth. But the real genius, according to the source analysis, was the feeling Pepsodent delivered.
Ah, the minty tingle, the smoothness.
That's it, that cool, clean, slightly tingly sensation you get running your tongue over your teeth after brushing. That became the real, immediate reward. It created this subtle but distinct physical sensation that people started to crave.
So they missed the feeling if they didn't brush.
Right. The loop solidified. Cue, feeling that film on your teeth, maybe seeing the ads about it. Routine, brushing with Pepsodent. Reward, not just whiter teeth eventually, but that immediate, satisfying, clean feeling. That feeling satisfied the craving. The source even have that diagram: Quanimca Hopkins Viveng Luptocaine Pepsodent, laying it out.
And it worked phenomenally well. Created a massive market, changed public health. Shows how powerful linking a cue to a rewarding sensation can be.
Absolutely. Now contrast that with the story of Febreze, another P&G product.
Right.
But its launch was rocky.
Right. It was designed as this amazing odor eliminator, so the obvious cue should be bad smells, right?
Logically, yes, but it failed initially. Why? Because people often go nose blind to the smells in their own homes. You live with pets or musty furniture, you stop noticing the odor after a while.
So the intended cue wasn't actually being perceived by the target audience. The source mentions that woman with 9 cats.
Yeah, the researchers visited her home, which apparently had a very strong cat odor, but she genuinely couldn't smell it. So telling her Febreze eliminated odors wasn't a compelling proposition because she didn't perceive the problem, the cue.
So the product worked, but the habit loop wouldn't form. What did P&G do?
They sent researchers back into people's homes, but this time just to observe their cleaning routines, not focused on odor, just watching how people cleaned.
And they noticed something.
They noticed people weren't reaching for Febreze when things smelled bad. They were often using it after they finished cleaning. Like, they'd make the bed, fluff the pillows, and then give it a little spritz of Febreze, or finish vacuuming and spray the carpet.
Ah, so the end of the cleaning routine became the new cue.
Exactly. Finishing the task was the cue, and the reward shifted. It wasn't about eliminating an unnoticed bad smell anymore. It became the pleasant scent of Febreze itself. That little burst of freshness became the signal of completion, the feeling of a job well done, a clean space. It was adding a positive finishing touch.
That's a brilliant pivot. They changed the marketing too, right? The slogan shifted.
Yeah, from something like gets rid of bad smells, which was a big hack muy karchu size, drive away bad smells from fabric, to more like part of a clean home or cleaning the smell of life, lam sak muy kak sang. It reframed the product as a reward integrated into an existing routine.
And that worked. Febreze became huge.
Because they found a way to insert it into a habit loop that was already strong, providing a reward, that satisfying scent of clean that people started to crave as the final step. The researchers literally saw people spraying it and smiling with satisfaction.
So if the cue isn't working or the craving isn't obvious, you might need to find a different cue and link your product or behavior to a different reward that taps into an existing routine.
It really underscores how understanding the specific cue, routine, reward, and especially the craving, being satisfied, is absolutely essential, whether you're trying to build a new habit or change an old one.
Which leads us perfectly to the golden rule of habit change. The source really emphasizes this.
It's the core principle, yeah. And it sounds almost too simple, but the research backs it up. To change an existing habit, you generally need to keep the original cue, keep the original reward, but consciously insert a new routine.
Don't fight the cue or deny the reward, just swap out the behavior.
That's the idea. The source uses the story of Lisa Allen to illustrate this. She was a long-time heavy smoker.
Right, going through a tough time, divorce, stress, feeling out of control.
And then on a trip to Cairo, kind of out of the blue, she decides to quit smoking. And succeeds.
The scientists studying her case, they didn't think it was just the trip or the divorce that caused her to quit, did they?
Not directly. Their analysis suggested the critical factor was her intense focus on changing that one specific habit. She recognized the cues that made her want to smoke: stress, boredom, finishing a meal. She acknowledged the craving. But instead of lighting up the old routine, she systematically experimented with new routines: chewing Nicorette gum, going for short runs, doing push-ups. She found replacements that provided a similar reward, maybe stress relief or distraction.
So she kept the cue, aimed for a similar reward, but subbed in a different action.
Exactly. And the source mentions brain scans showing new neural pathways forming, basically overriding the old smoking pathways. She was consciously rewriting her habit loop.
This ties into that other really powerful concept the source covers, Keystone Habits, Toy Bun.
Yeah, keystone habits are fascinating. There's certain habits that, when you change them, seem to spark a chain reaction. They trigger other positive changes across different areas of your life, almost automatically.
Like Lisa focusing just on smoking, but that success gave her a sense of control that then bled over into improving her diet, her work habits, her finances.
Precisely. It wasn't just about the cigarettes. Changing that one core habit rebuilt her self-efficacy and seemed to reorganize other routines around it.
The source had another great example, that weight loss study, where people weren't told to diet or exercise. They were just asked to do one thing.
Keep a food journal. Just write down everything they ate.
That's it.
That was the only intervention. A small, seemingly simple habit change. But the act of tracking, of just becoming aware of the routine, eating, acted as a keystone. It led many participants to spontaneously start making healthier choices and exercising more, even though nobody told them to.
Why does that work?
It seems keystone habits work by creating structures that help other habits flourish. They teach self-monitoring, build small wins that increase confidence, and make you more aware of your own patterns, which then makes it easier to tweak other related routines.
It's like getting one domino to fall sets off a whole chain.
That's a perfect analogy. Find the right first domino.
Now, changing habits, building new routines, it takes effort.
Yeah.
Which brings us to willpower. The source digs into this quite a bit. Is it a skill, a muscle, something else?
It's a really interesting area of research. Early on, you had studies like the famous Stanford marshmallow experiment in the 60s.
Wait for the second marshmallow.
Right. Kids who could delay gratification and wait for the bigger reward tended to have better outcomes later in life, higher test scores, better careers.
Yeah.
That made willpower seem like this crucial, maybe innate trait for success.
But then later research complicated that picture. Like Mark Mervin's work suggesting willpower acts more like a muscle that can get tired.
The radishes and cookies study is the classic example here. Picture this. Hungry college students come into a lab that smells amazing, like fresh-baked chocolate chip cookies.
Oh, no.
On the table. A plate of those warm cookies and a bowl of raw radishes. Group 1 is told, help yourself to the cookies. Group 2 is told, you can only eat the radishes, do not touch the cookies.
Pure torture for group 2. They had to exert serious willpower.
Serious willpower. Then, after that, both groups were given a puzzle to solve. Unbeknownst to them, the puzzle was actually impossible. Moraven just wanted to see how long they'd persist before giving up.
And the radish eaters, the ones who'd resisted the cookies?
They gave up much faster. On average, they lasted only about 8 minutes. The cookie eaters, who hadn't had to exert much willpower earlier, kept trying for nearly 20 minutes.
Wow. So resisting the cookies drained their mental energy for the next task.
That was the conclusion. Willpower seemed to be a finite resource, like a muscle that gets fatigued with use. The source quotes Moravin, "Ilako Adam," that their willpower was tired.
But it's not just that it gets tired, right? The source mentions it can also be strengthened.
Exactly. Later research, including Maravin's own, indicated that while willpower can be depleted in the short term, it can also be strengthened over the long term with consistent practice. Like exercising a muscle makes it stronger over time. Regularly practicing self-control in small ways might build up your overall willpower capacity.
And there was another crucial factor Mervin found influencing how quickly willpower depletes, feeling like you have control.
Autonomy.
Yes, this is really important. He found that willpower drained less quickly when people felt they were acting out of their own choice, for reasons that were personally meaningful to them, rather than feeling forced or controlled.
Like the experiments comparing people treated like cogs in a machine versus those treated politely and given some sense of choice. The second group's willpower lasted longer, right? Or the example of the factory workers in Ohio, when they were given more autonomy deciding how to set up their workstations, choosing their break times, their productivity went up, suggesting their willpower wasn't being depleted as much by feeling micromanaged.
And the Starbucks training example, too, focusing on internal discipline, customer service as a personal value.
It helps employees feel a sense of purpose and control, which can buffer them against the willpower drain of a stressful job. So, feeling autonomous, feeling like you're making a meaningful choice, seems to make willpower more resilient.
So willpower, it's finite, it gets tired, but you can train it, and feeling in control helps preserve it. Okay, that's a lot on individual habits. How does this scale up? What about habits in organizations or even whole societies?
The source draws a direct parallel here, citing Jeffrey Hodgson's idea that routines are basically the organizational equivalent of habits. Companies, institutions, they develop these ingrained ways of doing things.
How decisions get made, how information flows, how problems are tackled. These become automatic routines.
Exactly. And just like personal habits, these organizational routines can be incredibly efficient, but also incredibly resistant to change. They develop inertia.
So what breaks through that inertia? The source highlights crisis as a major catalyst.
Yeah, often it takes a crisis to shake things up. The example of Paul O'Neill at Alcoa is fascinating. He becomes CEO in 1987, and Wall Street expects him to talk profits, restructuring.
But he comes out and says his top priority, his absolute focus will be worker safety. And Tan Lao Dung, zero accidents.
Which sounded bizarre to investors, maybe even irrelevant to the bottom line. But O'Neill understood habits. He saw safety not just as a goal, but as a potential keystone habit for the entire company.
How so? How does focusing on safety change everything else?
Because to achieve zero accidents in a heavy industrial company like Alcoa, you can't just put up posters. You have to fundamentally understand why accidents happen. That means digging into the production process, improving quality control so equipment doesn't fail, streamlining communication so warnings get heard.
It forces you to look at the whole system.
Precisely. And crucially, it required empowering workers, giving them the authority to stop the production line immediately if they saw a risk, without fear of reprisal. That changed the power dynamic, the communication flow, everything. The source includes a diagram illustrating this Alcoa loop. Cue, worker sees a risk. Routine, reports it, maybe stops the line, problem gets fixed. Reward, safer workplace, but also smoother process, better communication.
So that one focus, safety, rippled outwards.
Massively. Alcoa became the safest industrial company in the world, yes, but its productivity soared, quality went way up, and profits hit record levels. O'Neill's Keystone Habit transformed the organizational culture by forcing the creation of better routines across the board. It even supposedly influenced workers' safety habits at home.
That's a powerful, positive example. But the source also shows the dark side of organizational habits, right? Like at Rhode Island Hospital.
A very different story. That hospital was apparently rife with conflict, especially between doctors and nurses. Communication was terrible, working conditions were poor, leading to a strike. And instead of fixing the underlying problems, the staff developed these informal workarounds, kitak bingtung, normal rules, essentially bad organizational habits to just cope with the dysfunction.
Like nurses creating their own secret codes for dealing with difficult doctors.
Exactly. These were attempts to smooth things over, a set dum-dum, a
Mm.
pause, or workaround,
Mm.
but they became ingrained routines that often bypassed official procedures and safety checks. The system was brittle.
And that led to disaster, the wrong side brain surgery incident.
A horrific outcome. But the investigation showed it wasn't just one person's mistake. It was a systemic failure rooted in these dysfunctional organizational habits. Communication breakdowns, unclear protocols, workarounds becoming the norm. It created an environment where such a catastrophic error could happen.
It shows how dangerous these undirected, reactive organizational habits can become if they're not consciously designed and managed for safety and clarity.
Another chilling example the source uses is the King's Cross underground fire in London.
A terrible tragedy. The source mentions a figure of 583 deaths. Mental note. Reconfirming I must stick to the source's figure, though it differs from common records.
Yes, a staggering number. And the investigation afterwards painted a picture of multiple failures, all stemming from ingrained organizational habits or routines.
Like the ticket agent who saw the initial small fire on the escalator?
Right. He didn't call the fire brigade directly because the established routine, his limited authority, was just to report small fires internally first, a habit of staying strictly within your defined role.
And the staff weren't trained on the fire equipment?
Because the equipment was managed by a completely different department. A classic example of organizational silos, another habit. Information didn't flow effectively between units. Warnings weren't shared properly as the situation escalated.
So seemingly minor habits, sticking to your job description, not sharing info across departments combined to prevent effective action in an emergency. The source diagram, mislabeled but depicting King's Cross, shows it. Cue, fire spotted. Routine, following narrow protocol, not acting broadly due to habit authority. Reward, maybe avoiding trouble, staying in lane, but the result is disaster.
It starkly illustrates how routines that might seem efficient or harmless in normal times may be formed out of convenience, or even avoiding conflict can become catastrophic liabilities when faced with the unexpected. It wasn't necessarily malice, just the inertia of the way things are done.
It really reinforces that crisis often forces organizations to confront these deep-seated habits, like the Challenger disaster making NASA overhaul safety culture, or the Tenerife crash changing air traffic control communication forever.
Crisis demands a reevaluation of the automatic.
Okay, so organizations have their own internal habits, but they also spend enormous effort trying to figure out and influence our habits as consumers. The Target pregnancy prediction story is a prime example from the source.
Right, this one got a lot of attention. A data analyst at Target, Andrew Pohl, figured out how to identify customers who were likely pregnant, often very early on, just by looking at their shopping history.
Based on what they bought, like unscented lotions, certain vitamins, cotton balls.
Exactly. These items, bought together or in changing patterns, served as cues. They signaled a high probability of pregnancy, indicating a future craving or need for baby products. Target could then send targeted coupons and ads. The reward, savings, convenience, right when that customer would be most receptive.
And it worked incredibly well from a prediction standpoint, but then came the backlash.
Yeah, it became a potential PR nightmare. People felt spied on, creeped out that a retailer seemed to know they were pregnant before they'd even told their families. It crossed a line for many.
So Target had to get clever about hiding the fact they were targeting so specifically.
They started camouflaging it. They'd still send the pregnant customer coupons for diapers and cribs, based on the algorithm's prediction from her shopping habits, cues. But they'd mix them in with random, irrelevant offers coupons for lawnmowers, wine glasses, stuff she clearly wasn't interested in at that moment.
Making the whole mailer seem random, less like surveillance.
Exactly. It made the targeting less obvious, less creepy, even though the underlying habit analysis and prediction were still driving it. It's a powerful example of how companies build detailed Chandung Kahang customer profiles based on our purchasing habits, using those patterns as cues to market to us, often without us having a clue how they figured it out.
And it's not just retail. The source talks about the music industry trying to figure out why some songs get stuck in our heads, become sticky.
Rich Meyer's research looked into this. Why do certain songs become huge radio hits, played over and over, even if many listeners, if you ask them directly, might say, I don't really like that song?
It's not always about objective quality, is it?
Often it's about familiarity and fitting expectations. Sticky songs tend to sound like songs that are already popular on that station. They fit the existing sonic landscape. They use familiar structures, chord progressions, tempos. Even if the song is new, it feels familiar because it matches the listener's ingrained habit of hearing certain types of sounds on that station.
So the brain recognizes the pattern, even unconsciously. The source uses Celine Dion as an example.
Yeah, the idea being some listeners might not actively choose to listen to her, but if her song comes on the radio station they habitually listen to, and it fits the overall sound profile they expect from that station, they don't switch away. Their listening habit keeps them there because the song meets the brain's expectation, satisfying a subtle craving for the familiar sound pattern.
And radio stations use this, right? The sandwich strategy to introduce new music.
Yes, the source shows this visually. You take a new, unfamiliar song you want people to accept, and you play it between two massive, already well-loved, sticky hits.
Ah, wrap the unknown in the familiar.
Exactly. The comfort and familiarity of the hit songs before and after make the listener more receptive to the new thing in the middle. It eases the transition, makes the unfamiliar less jarring, increasing the chance the listener stays tuned, and the new song eventually becomes familiar and maybe even sticky itself.
It shows how even our tastes, what we think we like, can be subtly shaped by our listening habits and the way information or music is presented to us based on those habits.
It's manipulating the context, leveraging the power of familiarity, which is deeply linked to habit.
And these principles extend beyond commerce and media right into our communities and social lives.
Definitely. The source mentions a simple study about why people stick with exercising at the YMCA.
It wasn't just about having nice equipment, was it?
No. The biggest factor predicting whether members kept coming back was social connection. Did the staff know their name? Did they make friends there?
So the social interaction was the key reward.
It seemed to be. The feeling of recognition, belonging, community, that social reward reinforced the habit loop of going to the gym. Cue, time for workout, routine. Exercising at the Y, reward, social connection. It highlights how being part of a group, the social habits of that group, can really support or undermine individual habit change.
Which leads to the most powerful example in the source of social habits driving change, the Montgomery bus boycott. It wasn't just Rosa Parks acting alone.
No, the source frames it as a movement deeply rooted in and sustained by the existing social fabric and habits of the Black community in Montgomery. Rosa Parks was the spark, yes, but her position within that community was crucial.
She knew a lot of people, right, across different groups.
She had incredibly strong close ties with friends, activists. But she also had an unusually wide network of Moikwanhel Longlo, weak ties acquaintances in churches, women's groups, social clubs, all sorts of circles.
So when she was arrested, the news could spread fast through those existing networks.
Like wildfire. The strong ties mobilized the initial core group. But sustaining a boycott for over 380 days, that required activating the weak ties and building new community habits.
How did the weak ties help sustain it?
It became about social expectation and peer pressure, in a positive sense. The Sukmant Kunin Moikwan law. People participated not just because they were deeply committed activists, but because their neighbors, their church friends, the people they saw casually their weak ties were doing it. It became the expected behavior. Boycotting the buses became the new social norm, the routine. The source mentions studies like McAdams on Freedom Summer, showing participation in high-risk activism was better predicted by social network connections than by individual attitudes alone.
Even religious belief was more powerful if you belonged to a church community that supported the boycott.
Yes. The group reinforced the individual's commitment. The social habit strengthened the personal resolve.
And leadership played a role in shaping the narrative, the meaning behind the habit.
Critically, leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. didn't just frame it as a protest. They framed it as a spiritual imperative, part of God's plan. A movement rooted in love and nonviolence described as mudkayom, an embrace, not just a fight. This provided a powerful shared belief, a new reward, moral rightness, divine purpose, and new routines. Nonviolent resistance, intricate carpooling systems that sustained the movement through immense hardship, like the bombing of King's house. The community structure, plus the shared narrative, created social habits strong enough to achieve massive change. It really demonstrates how interconnected individual habits and broader social patterns are.
Okay, we've seen the power of habits everywhere inside us, in companies, in society. But this leads to a really tricky question the source tackles head-on. Responsibility. If habits are so automatic, so powerful, maybe even neurologically ingrained, are we always responsible for what we do when we're acting out of habit?
It's a huge ethical and legal minefield. The source dives into it using some really challenging court cases. First, Angie Bachman's gambling addiction.
Right, the housewife who started visiting casinos got hooked and ended up with huge debts.
Initially, it was an escape, some excitement. But it became all-consuming chomlan tuam bakuksum koko. She described the anxiety just melting away at the casino, the thrill of winning, even the pain of losing, fading quickly, driving her back. She developed compulsive routines, playing multiple blackjack hands, betting wildly.
And there's research suggesting problem gamblers might have brain differences affecting craving and impulse control.
Yes, the source mentions work by Rosa Habib indicating potential neurological vulnerabilities. And of course, casinos are masterfully designed to exploit the habit loop. Near misses on slots, the constant rewards program perks, free rooms, meals. The environment itself, it's all engineered to trigger cravings and reinforce the gambling routine. That quote about near misses being like, them du valua, adding fuel to the fire, is spot on.
So when Bachman was sued by the casino for her debts, her defense was basically, I couldn't control it, my habit took over, and you exploited it.
A compelling argument from a habit perspective. But the court didn't buy it, ultimately. A key factor mentioned in the source was the existence of voluntary self-exclusion programs, chuang trunan chun trungwen.
Where gamblers can basically ask the casino to ban them.
Right. The court reasoned that because such programs existed, Bachman had a conscious opportunity at some point before entering the casino and getting caught in the loop to take responsibility and prevent herself from gambling. Her failure to use that conscious escape hatch, so to speak, meant she was still held responsible for the debts incurred while acting on her habit.
So the law drew a line saying even if the habit feels uncontrollable during the routine, the conscious choice to enter the triggering environment or the failure to take available steps to block it still matters for responsibility.
It's a tough line to draw. Where does overwhelming craving tip over into compulsion that negates responsibility? The source presents it as a real dilemma.
And then there's the contrasting case. Brian Thomas, the man who killed his wife while sleepwalking.
A truly tragic situation. Thomas had a history of sleep disorders. During a nightmare where he thought he was fighting off an intruder attacking his wife, he tragically strangled her in his sleep.
And the science of sleepwalking was key to his defense.
Crucial. Experts testified that during sleepwalking, the brain's conscious control center, the prefrontal cortex, is effectively offline. Actions are driven by more primitive brain regions, executing automatic routines or instinctual responses like fight or flight without conscious thought, judgment, or inhibition.
So his lawyers argued he wasn't acting consciously. He was acting out an ancient, automatic, defensive habit or instinct while his rational brain was asleep.
Exactly. And the court agreed. He was acquitted because the evidence showed he was not consciously aware or in control of his actions at the time. He was acting purely out of an unconscious automatic state.
So why was he acquitted while Bachman was held responsible? Both involved actions driven by potentially unconscious processes or overwhelming urges.
The key difference, as interpreted by the law and presented in the source, seems to hinge on that element of prior conscious choice. Bachman, at some point, consciously chose to go to the casino, the place that triggered her habit. Thomas had no conscious awareness or choice in initiating the sleepwalking episode or the actions within it. The law seems to look for a moment of conscious volition, however distant, that enabled the habit-driven action.
It's a fascinating and difficult distinction. It forces us to think about where automaticity ends and free will, or at least legal responsibility, begins.
And it connects back to those older philosophical ideas the source mentions. Aristotle saying habits shape our very character.
Yeah.
William James's metaphor of habit as the coat retaining its fold, guiding our path.
Or David Foster Wallace's "This is water" habits are the invisible medium we swim in, and the first step is just recognizing them.
Becoming aware of the automatic patterns that shape so much of what we do and who we are.
Okay, so after exploring all this, the science, the stories, the ethical complexities, let's bring it back to the practical. For the listener who wants to change a habit in their own life, what are the concrete steps suggested by the source material?
It boils down to a pretty clear four-step framework, building on everything we've discussed.
Step 1.
Identify the routine. Simple awareness first. What's the specific behavior you want to change? Nail biting, mindless scrolling, snapping at your kids when stressed. Just clearly define the routine itself without judgment initially.
Okay, know the behavior. Step 2.
Experiment with rewards. This is about digging into the craving. Why are you doing this routine? What need is it really fulfilling? Is it boredom, stress relief, a need for connection, a physical sensation? The source suggests actively experimenting. After you perform the routine or feel the urge, try different potential rewards. Does eating a healthy snack satisfy the craving the same way chips do? Does taking 5 deep breaths reduce the stress? Does calling a friend fulfill the need for connection? Play detective to figure out what reward your brain is actually chasing. Remember Breeze, they had to figure out the real reward wasn't odor elimination, but the feeling of clean completion.
Got it. Find the true craving. Step 3.
Isolate the cue. Now that you know the routine and the reward craving, you need to pinpoint the trigger. What kicks off the whole loop? The source suggests looking at 5 common categories. Location, where are you? Time, what time is it? Emotional state, how are you feeling? Other people, who else is around? And preceding action, what did you just finish doing? By paying attention to these factors whenever the urge strikes, you can usually identify the specific cue or cues reliably triggering the habit. It's like the witness memory analogy. Focusing on these details brings the pattern into focus.
Be a detective about your own triggers. Makes sense. And the final step, step 4.
Have a plan and believe. Okay, now you have all the pieces. The cue, the old routine, the reward craving. The final step is to make a conscious plan. Decide in advance on a new routine that you will deliberately implement as soon as you recognize the cue. This new routine should ideally provide a similar reward to the one you identified in step 2. So if the cue is stress at 3 p.m. and the reward is distraction energy boost, your plan might be, when I feel stressed at 3 p.m., I will walk around the block for 5 minutes instead of reach for candy.
So premeditate the replacement routine.
Yes. And crucially, this step involves belief. You have to believe that change is possible. The source stresses that this belief is often much easier to cultivate and maintain within a supportive context, a group like AA, a friend who knows your plan, a community that shares the goal. Like the Montgomery boycotters drawing strength from each other. Belief, often socially reinforced, is vital.
So identify routine, experiment with rewards, isolate cue, have a plan and believe. It's a clear process.
It is. And the source is optimistic. It concludes, Han to ang kos, vaja dang kosa, jungta bt check lamta now. It is totally possible. And now we know how.
We have the blueprint.
We have the blueprint.
All right, let's quickly recap our journey through this deep dive. We started right down at the nuts and bolts, the habit loop. Cue, routine, reward. Saw how the basal ganglia automates things, sometimes totally outside our awareness, like with Eugene Pauly.
Then we layered on the critical role of craving, that anticipation of the reward, fueled by dopamine, that really powers the loop. Schultz's monkey showed us that. It explains why habits have such a grip.
We saw how this understanding was used brilliantly by people like Claude Hopkins, with pepsodent linking plaque cue to that clean feeling reward, and P&G repositioning Febreze as a reward for finishing cleaning.
We hit the golden rule. Keep the cue and reward, change the routine, and saw the power of keystone habits like quitting smoking or food journaling to spark wider changes. Plus, we unpacked willpower. Like a muscle, it gets tired, but can be trained and feels stronger when we have autonomy.
Then we scaled up. Organizational habits at Alcoa, transformed by focusing on safety as a keystone. Contrasted with the dangerous, dysfunctional routines at Rhode Island Hospital and the tragic siloed habits contributing to the King's crossfire. Crisis often forces change here.
We looked at how companies like Target analyze our habits to predict needs and sell to us, sometimes skookily well, and how even music stickiness relates to fitting our listening habits and expectations, leading to strategies like the radio sandwich.
And we saw the power of social habits boosting YMCA attendance through connection and underpinning the monumental Montgomery bus boycott through shared networks, expectations, and narrative.
Finally, we wrestled with that tough question of responsibility. Angie Bachman's gambling versus Brian Thomas's sleepwalking. Where does the law draw the line between conscious choice and automatic behavior? Leading us to reflect on how much of our self is built from these ingrained patterns.
Wow. From brain cells to social movements, it all comes back to these loops. All these examples, they really do illustrate principles that are playing out in your life, listener, right now. You're navigating this water made of habits, as Wallace put it.
Hopefully after this discussion that water feels a little less invisible.
So we'll leave you with this final thought to chew on, something bubbling up from all this material. If our habits, conscious or often unconscious, are such powerful drivers of our actions, shaping our paths, maybe even our destiny, as William James hinted, how much of what we experience as deliberate, moment-to-moment free will is actually just the smooth execution of these incredibly well-worn neural grooves? And what happens, practically speaking, when your deeply ingrained personal habits crash against the equally ingrained, often unseen habits and routines of your workplace, your community, maybe even your family?
Something to observe. Pay attention to the loops within you and the loops around you. See the water.